Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. Please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you.
So the way we usually, we can do whatever you want, but the way we usually do it is that we just conversationally flow into whatever we're going to talk about. I have read your book.
Okay, what do you think?
No, I love it. I mean, it's so cool. Just because, number one, it's the way in which, it's put together, right? But then also the sentiments there, I was, as you can see by the markings, very much in agreement.
Brilliant.
Yeah, right. So I was going through going, yep, that, sure. Yep, that one too. Oh yeah, definitely that one. We got to mark that one down. So I was all over it. And it's just lovely. I mean, it's just a lovely piece of work.
Thank you so much. I tell you what, you can help me solve a challenge that my wife has given me, because she hears about all the kind of book stuff, and I'm like, yeah, it's fine. And she says, I think your book should be on some universities or all universities' reading lists. And I'm a bit like, yeah, okay. And so if you could hand it to a student or get it on the reading list of a course, then I can go back to my wife and say, yeah, I did that. And then and she'll be like, yay. And I'll be like, under less pressure.
Well,
For her saying, you should just go and change the world.
You can save a marriage, Gary.
I am not in a position to grant many wishes, Adrian. This is one I can actually grant, because why your wife is smart here about this is that, and as I was reading this, I was like, this is the exact kind of book that students would love, because it's visual and it's concise, right? I mean, the points you're making are profound enough to let a person like me who's teaching kind of move off of them, right? They're concise enough that I could build a lot out of, but they're concise enough also that I know students would read it.
Cool. I mean, that's just made my day. I will tell her, and it will make her day too.
No, I'm teaching employee experience over the summer. I teach a course on employee experience.
Nice.
And so something like this fits perfectly into something like that, because of the way you integrate experience design, and not just customer experience. It's not just the metric. It's not just the wow. It's also the employees. It's your culture, right? I mean, it's like about you as a CEO, don't worry about fixing the customers, fix you. Don't worry about fixing your digital, fix you first, because none of the other stuff is going to matter unless if you're all screwed up.
So just for some housekeeping stuff, can I swear on this?
Yeah.
Fucking great.
Yeah. Yeah, we can always do that. Because I think
that's the kind of that's the thing. The book is a bit like that. I tell you what, I did find you'll find this fascinating. I think there was a piece of research that was done that I wrote about, because I thought it was just supremely interesting. Because I combined it with a piece of coal data research that came from Coal Miner, and they do kind of coal analytics and they were talking about the rise of profanity in contact center interactions. However, serendipitously, I'd also discovered this piece of academic research that said, or rather suggested, that people that use profanity have a tendency to be more direct and more honest. And I was a bit like, that's interesting. And because if you think about it from an organizational perspective, most organizations, as soon as they hear profanity, they go whoop, and then the red lights go off, and like, not listen, not listen to that anymore. And therefore they don't lean into it and don't really understand it, even though the science is suggesting actually that might be more useful. And I thought, that's fascinating. So, and I find as I get older, I'm tending to be a bit more sweary. I don't know if that's me embracing my inner cantankerous kind of like, I don't know, being or not, or just I'm just getting a bit more shouty. Who knows?
Well, there is, I was just looking it up and I did not watch it yet, but on Netflix, there is a documentary called The History of Swear Words.
Ah, we've watched it. Loved it.
It's brilliant. It's good.
Oh, Nicolas
Cage series.
Love it. Brilliant. It's sort of a bit like the play on, have you seen the one that Jeff Goldblum has done? I don't know if it's on Netflix or Prime or whatever, where he just looks into things that he's just interested in.
Oh, that's Nat Geo, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, so he's going, I want to know about coffee, or I want to know about tattoos, or I want to know about denim, or I want to know about this or that or other. And he just goes deep into these things. Like they did one on barbecues and stuff. And he just gets up to his neck in this sort of stuff and finds it does the whole history and everything. So it's almost a bit like Nick Cage has done that for profanity. And it's like, and it's just beautiful and really funny in places.
I think there's a nice thing about regarding your book, Punk CX, is companies claim they want authentic experiences, but they really don't. They really want their workers to have these standardized, sanitized, regimented, measurable things that can get as close to authentic as possible while still retaining what they see as those essential qualities. And so talking about swearing on a podcast or your history of swear words and your book, it kind of connects for me, because despite what companies claim they want, when you look at their actual behaviors, it's pretty clear that's not what they really want.
Yeah, and you know what I actually can like think. I mean, because there's a I don't know if it's a contradiction in there or a hypocrisy possibly, or possibly both, in that people say they want this kind of authentic sort of thing, but invariably they're not that way themselves. So that's kind of one thing. And then the other thing is, I think there's one. I think one of the biggest challenges in organizations around empowering and or enabling people to do the right thing for the right reasons in the right way, as it were, is how many people that either own organizations or run them and manage them and things. It's almost like that the assumptions that they have, or the beliefs and the values they have in their heads about what they think about people in service positions.
Yeah, right.
And because it's always frustrated me that, and this is one of the reasons I got into this sort of space, is that it frustrates me that too many organizations get in the way of their people doing a good job. And ultimately it's all about, I believe that, people given the right sort of conditions and the right sort of support are capable of all sorts of greatness in all sorts of different ways that we haven't really thought of. We just have to sort of enable them to do that, but not in you can put guide rails, but I guess it's all about how stringent those guide rails are. And some people are a bit like, you're trussed up as if you're like, you've got long sleeve shirt. You're like, we're off to the funny farm here.
Right, right.
And I think it's fundamentally rooted in what they believe people are capable of. And that's not just restricted to kind of organizations. It's also restricted to, it's also kind of, we see that abound in, in politics and political beliefs and how people kind of, sell from a kind of a political kind of platform and everything. It's a lot of it's about kind of how we think about people.
That really resonates with me too. I was actually just listening to a podcast that's called Decade of Courage. that is a really great look at kind of weaving storytelling and expert ideas and anecdotes and history lessons and sort of context. And the episode was actually on like essentially the rise of neoliberalism. Not that we have to go too deep into this, but just this idea too, in terms of what, the systems that we put in place and how those actually define what a lot of leaders think people are capable of too. And that's like an important piece of this in terms of, when we say it's really all only about the individual acting in ways that are, either self-interested, or if we're in an organization acting in ways that are in the interest of the organization or for shareholders. It's interesting that like when we just try to put it on, it's the way this person acts, or even because swearing is a great individual thing that I do, right?
Right.
But then we like take no responsibility for the organization or the guardrails themselves. I think you're totally right too, where it's like we do see a lot of like wonderful things that people can do when they have decision-making power. And yeah, we all need to have some guardrails. That's what culture is, right? There are guardrails, so we don't just go do anything. But at the same time, when we're given decision-making power and leeway in terms of like, we can lean on your expertise as an individual, as a person with context and culture. We see people make, great decisions, and they can do really well. So I don't know. So this is interesting, just tying together. It's a lot of different thoughts there. About how we like consider cultural context and social context in terms of how organizations think about people. Because I think you're absolutely right there. I don't know if that does anything, but
no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's absolutely curious and about all of this, but I guess it makes me think about how do we unlearn some of that sort of stuff. Because even if you realize that as say a leader in an organization and you want to enable or produce better outcomes, but that you've gone this way, but you need to be kind of more this way, then what's that process of unlearning? And that's the thing that I find fascinating, because it shows up in that sort of thing, is that people will kind of like they'll say one thing, but then they'll do completely another because they actually haven't done the work to actually, understand what I need to do to back up what I'm saying, and to be that congruent character. Like, oh, I believe my people. Our people are our most important asset. Our people are everything. As as our customers, you treat them like crap. Like, how the hell is that supposed to work? But maybe the desire is there, but actually the biggest barrier is how do we unlearn some of all those habits and the cultures so we can then move to a different domain or different way of doing things.
One of the things that I've been thinking about a bit around this is around language. For instance, it's not like a big revelation, but language, how we talk about things affects how we perceive them and how we treat them. And, as we're chatting about this, I think one of the most harmful phrases that was ever created related to this point you're raising, Adrian, is knowledge workers or knowledge work, because it automatically creates that some work over here is knowledge work, but these people over there by definition, by default, would be unknowledge work or not knowledge work. And one of the points you raised, one of the chapters you raised, and I've raised it with clients, so a client might say, I want to know the voice of the customer, and we're going to create these surveys, and we're going to hire these people, and we're going to use these analytics. But what we're not going to do is talk to the people who actually talk to the customers, who actually listen to the literal voice of the customer. And when I've asked clients this, I've said, so you literally have recordings with the actual voice of the customer on it, and you do nothing to listen to it and analyze it? And they're like, no. Do you see a problem there? Well, yeah, there's just a call center people. Like, what would they know? Well, actually, quite a lot. They would know quite a lot if you ask them.
You just touched on a nerve there. I mean, because it makes me think about, everybody talks about, you talk about analytics and stuff, and then we get into sort of computing power, and then we'll start talking about, somebody will throw in AI, and then we'll get to kind of ML, and then we'll get to neural networks, and then it's all about how big the horsepower is, right?
Right.
And the thing that kind of like surprises me is like, when I say to people, it's like going, do you know that you have a network of organic supercomputers right in front of you? Oh, by the way, they're all networked.
Right.
And just, and they're there, and they've got all this kind of latent knowledge in them that is getting refreshed in real time every hour of every day that they're in the office, and yet you do not tap into their computing power in a meaningful way. Oh, and by the way, there's a double whammy kind of here, because if you do, and then you can actually ask them, and you listen to them, and then you acted on what they kind of like said, you get a kind of a flip side. One is you get real insight into what your customers are thinking from your employees' perspective, and two, the flip is that your employees actually kind of think, wow, they asked us, they listened to us, now they're doing something about it, and then, oh, they respect us.
Magic.
Magic.
If only we taught that in MBA school. Huh.
Well, kind of interestingly enough, is that I know it's sort of changing a little bit now, but I think you come back to kind of education. And what's fascinating, I find fascinating about MBAs. I have one, I took one about 20 years ago. But even now, I think about MBAs and I think about what they teach. And it always struck me that MBAs don't teach sales largely, and they don't teach customer service, which are probably two of the most important kind of parts of any kind of business. They teach finance, they'll teach HR, they'll teach kind of operational research, they'll teach marketing, they'll teach strategy, leadership, blah, 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 blah. But the kind of the two bits where people kind of have to interface with other human beings,
right?
And that's where the real magic kind of happens. Largely absent. And I think that just speaks volumes about kind of how we go back to learning and unlearning and relearning sort of like stuff. If we don't set the base, and ask ourselves, what does it mean to serve? What does it mean to kind of provide good service? How do people kind of do that? What does it mean to kind of to be a good salesperson, to understand something, to actually kind of listen, and to engage with kind of people? I think that's kind of fascinating. It's a massive gap, I think, in a lot of business education. But I know there's some schools that are catching up, and they're starting to add sort of customer experience into their mix, because that's become interesting and a bit more sexy, as it were. But not many people are there. I would suggest they're taking more of the data and the analytics and the marketing side of things, right?
Right.
But they're not going down into the kind of the sort of service side of things or support side of things, regardless of how important those things are.
Well, it's like,
and I sort of wonder why.
Well, I'm being from the inside a little bit, being an academic or teaching an MBA program as well. I'm not speaking about my school per se, but just in general, the idea that we want to teach customer experience as a set of checkoff boxes that you need to accomplish in order to say you're doing that thing. At the best, by the way, because many companies, as you know, are just like, we need to do customer experience. Who can we get? Who knows? You went to art school. Why don't you do it? Yeah, or you do user experience. It's basically the same thing. Do it. And without really understanding the transformational element of what it means for the organization. It's just a thing to do to get a higher NPS, or it's a thing to do because our competitors are doing it, or there's a analytic dashboard in Salesforce that has something about it, but not really to live it and to be it. And the same thing with employee experience. It's like, we got to do it because, we want to say we do it because everyone else is doing it. And we read a McKinsey or McKesson or Forrester or Gardner report that said we should be doing it, but we really don't know what it is, but we don't want to take too much time doing it. And so it becomes distilled into this kind of formalized, essentialized thing that doesn't have the transformative power. And then when people do it, they look around going, well, we didn't see any difference. That's because you didn't want to have a difference. Yeah,
no, completely. So the thing I'm interested by as well, and I'd be intrigued to get your view on it, because I know that you're both academics and practitioners, and you're kind of in those kind of like fields like sociology and anthropology and design and everything else, which is not directly kind of like business, but it's kind of around, and it informs a lot of the things. I'd like to hear from you guys, because I'm always fascinated by kind of adjacency and knowledge that kind of travels horizontally, right? Because most things, as we know, go like this, because that's just the way that we're organized. But I love trying to apply different things. Go, oh, that happened over here. I wonder if it would apply over here, right? Just as a think piece. And so I'd be interested to hear from yourselves about reflections on, the state of service and experience and everything else, and some of the big things that you see from your place of knowledge that some either organizations or the discipline are kind of missing, as it were. Do you think actually we could learn a lot from this? We could learn, we're missing kind of that, and that would be a really interesting thing to try and apply, if that makes sense.
It's funny. One thing that jumps out from that is there's a design anthropologist named Sarah Pink in Australia, and she and a number of colleagues have been doing a ton of different work about how do we sort of both design spaces in hospitals and organizations, as well as how do we think about the role of staff in when we're designing spaces themselves. And so in this case, their goal is to actually help rethink questions of policy, which I know it sounds like it's one or two levels removed, but contemplating when we're looking at architectural plans or designs for buildings in the first place, that we can't think of, in this case, they were studying employee well-being and staff well-being, and how hospital staff would, sort of create spaces for themselves to be well, whether it's like, in a breakout room or just a quiet space in between working with patients. But how when you actually talk with nurses and doctors and you actually talk with the staff that are using these spaces, like what would it mean to design intentionally spaces around well-being for them in the first place, based on their experiences that they're already having. And it's funny because to us as an anthropologist or sociologist, that sounds like, duh, let's talk to people and get their perspectives right. But recognizing that like the point of this paper is to help influence policy so that when we do architectural planning, we actually think about that in the first place. So it's a lot of it is actually just this broad idea of how do we, to your question, Adrian, how do we cement the either customer or employee perspective as part of the actual design of spaces or again, engagement scenarios. And it is interesting just to, that it's great to see paper like this come out. This paper just came out. And so it's interesting just to realize that we're just getting there too at this point. We're just now starting to say, oh yeah, we have to put people back into the equation and actually contemplate those that are going to use the services or, buildings or organizations, whatever, those that are going to use them actually have to be part of the design process. I mean, that's what design anthropology is. It's like, we're going to design with and for and alongside those that will use the services, organizations, buildings and such. Yeah. But it's like, it's to your point, it's just like, we're just moving up the hill right now, but it's encouraging to see.
Yeah, well, it sort of sounds to me like, if you talk about architecture and stuff, and was it the classic balance between form and function, as it were? Yeah. And it seems to be that what's happening there is that the idea of, correct me if I'm wrong, that the function idea is just expanding. We're like going, oh, it's not just about that, but then, oh, there's this stuff as well that we need to kind of think. So it's almost becoming kind of more complex, perhaps.
Yeah.
But it's being a bit more, trying to think about things a bit more holistically.
Right.
Yeah.
And as I was reading your book, I actually wrote a note down, the Charles Mingus quote, which I think was great.
Yeah.
Where he said, making the simple complicated is commonplace, making the complicated simple, awesomely simple, that's creativity. And I think the thing I like to say often is never let a complex failure get in the way of a simple solution.
Mm-hmm.
And
I like that.
There is, in that simplicity, right, in coming up with a complex solution or a simple solution to a complex problem, is the distillation of disparate knowledge, right? It's the integration, distillation of disparate knowledge that you'll be able to connect to render this simple solution possible. Mm-hmm. It's not just, someone walked in a room and said, do that. It was the ability to, as Adam was saying, integrate this variety of things into an approach that allows for success to happen without massive disruption necessarily. Not that you don't always want massive disruption, but you don't always need it. Mm-hmm. And innovation doesn't have to be about massive disruption. You can innovate by changing how we look at it, by shifting our approach such that we give up one paradigm to adopt another. But you know, people don't get promoted on that necessarily. People don't feel like they've made progress on that. If someone says, well, oh, well, duh, there's a sense that we didn't really do anything.
Mm.
And so I also wonder, going back to the MBA trap or even the leadership trap, for me to feel like I made a big difference and earned what I'm supposed to be doing, I have to think more large or more, you know, larger than this one simple thing.
Mm. Yeah. The because you make so that made you the I love the Mingus quote. Because I wrestled with a bunch of different quotes around that sort of simplicity idea, and then being a bit of a fan of jazz as well as punk music, which is they're kind of uncomfortable bedfellows sometimes.
Right.
I love the kind of the Charlie Mingus one, but then when you were talking about that, it made me think about there's a quote that comes from Einstein, which talks about if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. And I think that also is an interesting sort of reflection and something that we can learn from both sociology and also anthropology in terms of methods of study. And there's also the discipline which is related to sociology and anthropology in many ways. It's like the discipline of sort of systems thinking.
Right.
One of the first things that you have to do is you have to go and study, just to go and observe and just to see what is going on, not to fix, but just to see. And that I think it's almost that's going to balance around, you know, some people get really impatient that actually if they're just observing and trying to understand, they're not doing something. And, you know, and it makes me kind of also think about this kind of esoteric sort of references. I remember I think it's Ken Blanchard that wrote the 1 Minute Manager books. Is that right?
Oh, no.
I think so. Anyway, I think it's the right reference. Anyway, the book is called The 1 Minute Manager, and it's this kind of story about this guy and how he kind of runs things and how he's grown to do that. But it gets to the point where in the afternoon he's kind of like sitting in his office with his feet up on the desk and stuff, and his boss comes in and goes like, "What are you doing?" He's like going, "I'm thinking," and he's like going, "Can he just not look busy?"
Right.
And I think that's the kind of the point, because he basically enabled everybody to make their own decisions and kind of like to equip them with the right sort of tools and skills and knowledge and everything to do this sort of thing. And he was there to help when needed, but he was also thinking and reflecting on other sort of like stuff. So the idea that you're just sat there thinking that doesn't naturally equate in the modern kind of organizational context with proper work.
Mm. It's like knowledge work, but that's the wrong kind of knowledge work, right?
Yeah.
I just think think that's fascinating. Maybe that's why we end up with these kind of like I don't know. Maybe people just sat there going, and they just sort of almost like hypnotically tapping away on their keyboards, but they're actually just kind of zoned out.
I mean, the one good thing about just sitting there is that you could always say, at least I'm not doing anything wrong right now.
Yeah.
So I'm doing no harm by not doing nothing, by doing nothing and not doing anything. So that's a win.
But I do think there is that sort of thing around. I think in many cases that it's. I think, and I have been thinking about for a while, is that a lot of all this stuff you talk about sort of unlearning things or relearning things or learning new things, and it's about space, creating the space to do that. And I think that's a function of time and how we manage our time and our attention. Because I find it fascinating. I speak to lots of people, and I'm always struck with horror. The idea when somebody goes back-to-back meetings all day. And I'm like, so when did you do some proper work?
right.
And even in how Zoom has changed that too, where we, rather than when I used to have a 10-minute break between, or 20-minute because you had to go actually walk somewhere, right now they just will just people, I think it took the world 6 months to realize we shouldn't just schedule meetings literally back to back to back to back because we're on Zoom all day, right? Like, oh wait, I have to go to the bathroom, I forgot about that, right? So it's even as simple as that too, where we don't even contemplate like tools that make things possible, or like, that may ease the fact that we can meet across the globe in different areas, but then we forget I have to take a bio break, right? Or that I need a moment to eat lunch, or I need a moment, actually, to your point, just to decompress, right? Even because it makes you more effective or productive as a worker. So it is interesting to think about that too. And just, to your earlier point about, when we get obsessed with AI and ML and all these other pieces, and thinking about how awesome our horsepower is, but then forgetting that we actually have the superpowers right with us anyway, right? I don't know, yeah. So, I mean, I am really struck by this idea of how do we kind of unlearn these things, and maybe jazz, to me, one of the more complex frames of music, has a lot to teach us in that space, in terms of that, to learn to improvise, you have to be somewhat of an expert, right? In order then to make it sound simple. But then it's funny because our humanity is what we're actually the most expert thing at, right?
Yeah, I
and
love that. I love
and it's
that.
like, we have to bring that back into play, I think. And especially when it comes to things like, I mean, the customers, it's like the idea the customer is the expert, right? In being a customer, as weird as that sounds, or the employee is the expert at being the employee. And yet we treat it like we have to coddle them or guide them or make them like do what we want them to do. If we're leadership, for example. I don't know. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, because that makes me think about the there's this idea that I call it the Jekyll and Hyde syndrome, where we're like all people, we're all kind of human beings. We get up in the morning and we're just like this human being. We're a combination of being, a parent or a son or a daughter, an employee and a customer and a citizen and a neighbor and all these different things. And we go about our business, and then many of us can seem to go to work and then cross over the threshold, and they become this kind of like person that forgets about everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of understand. I worry about kind of how and why that kind of happens. And it's not that people are monsters generally. It just seems to be a thing, and is that basically because they enter into a different, almost cultural construct, and it's all about expectations.
Yeah,
I think that's a big part of it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's all kinds of theories of the self, right? And so even to the point where if I put on different clothing, right, as a artifact of self, and how I do, like, as Irving Goffman's book, presentation of self, right? This dramaturgical self where I'm acting a role. It's not just a role I construct for myself, but it's a role that I am trying to adhere to based on the expectations created for me by others and society. And this even goes, not to get too weirdly sociological, but George Herbert Mead and the play stage and the generalized other in our development as not just human beings, but social beings. And then we get programmed into these things, and which then become constraining. And the trick is we are programmed into this constrained system that we ourselves are creating.
So I mean, but the thing is, like, those constraints are what allow us to communicate with each other, though. So it's like, it's interesting that like the constraints themselves aren't bad, right? We need them. But yes, it's important for us to be like, but we actually did socially create these, right? And so when they don't work for us, that's our responsibility to then say, hold on, let's pause and reflect. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there, but like I think it tells us something important there, where it's like, the point is not to be, I mean, maybe to not be pure anarchy, but it is to like stick it to the man a little bit in terms of the man being culture, in that like, it's okay to like talk back to it and say, we actually can set the rules a bit differently, because we created these rules in the first place, right? They're not just there to be there. Oh yeah. So there's something really interesting about that too. So anyway, back to you, Gary. Sorry.
No, I think that's spot on, because the question then becomes, to what extent are these things valuable and important, right? What are they serving? I was talking to a friend of mine, and one of the things that he often asks himself around a bad behavior is, what's that doing for you? I mean, what's that behavior doing for you? What are you getting out of that? Are you getting anything out of that? So as long as those constraints are productive and we're getting things out of that and they're useful, it makes sense, right? It's easy to find a doctor in a hospital because you look for the stethoscope and the coat, right? I mean, it has a function, but at the same time, it also creates role expectations and performative elements which can impede in delivering patient experience, not just from the doctor's point of view, but also the patient's point of view, because they're co-creating it together. And if all we're focused on, going back to your systems point, Adrian, which I think is so important, if all you're doing is focused on patient experience, it's like going out to eat and only focusing on one part of the meal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what about the other parts of the meal? Because together it creates the meal. If all you're doing is worrying about the patient and you're not working about the doctor, the nurse, the receptionist, the parking attendant, the custodial staff, whatever, wherever your list ends, then you're not really worrying about the total experience. You're just worrying about this one thing, probably just for, at least in the United States, billing and reimbursement purposes,
Right.
or because you have to. Right. And if you really want to improve that thing, it takes more than just, your electronic health record portal, but it goes into what are the experiences of those people, frontline staff who are working in that facility.
Mm.
That becomes that becomes the meal as a system. And, going beyond those constraints to think more globally becomes the goal, I think, at least laid out in your book. And how Adam and I talk about it as systems related professions, to look at it all and then to integrate it together.
Oh, hallelujah. I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, I can kind of agree more. I mean, that makes the problem kind of harder to sort of to understand. And we know how people respond to difficulty, generally run away from it. But therein lies the challenge, right? And yeah, I mean, it's a bit about seeing the whole. I mean, it struck me actually, Adam, when you talked about anarchy, because I'm quite a fan of anarchy. But anarchy is in a true philosophical sense, not in the popular sort of understanding of it or the propaganda-driven understanding of it. Yeah. It's more of a, the system of natural law and voluntary hierarchy. And it made me think about this idea of, and go back to the sort of the Charlie Mingus kind of quote, is that do we default to putting too much in place then and we keep adding and adding and adding, like controls and policies and rules and all these different things, and actually maybe we should work harder to kind of like slim them down? And would that give us more freedom?
I mean, just to add to the confusion pile, it's like the thing that like I struggle with here is, because I think you're right. Like I believe the like one solution is to help simplify, but like while we grapple with time and space, the other thing that like I think anthropology and sociology help us realize around these problems is that we also deal with the issue of scale, right? And that bureaucracy and complexity are directly related to scale on some level too, right? You don't see it. I mean, this is not a great example, but you don't think of any like small tribal group or small scale society as having massively complex bureaucracy. They may have like incredibly complex rituals and belief systems, and they may be just as complex as some idea we have about freedom and the Declaration of Independence of the United States. But the scale at which implementation has to take place is entirely different, right? And so that's just a point where I struggle too, where it's like time, space plus scale. But the thing is, that's why we need systems thinking, because we are dealing with such massive scales, even in an organization, right? And even just, again, pick a hospital, right? Just we have doctors and patients and nurses and billing and insurance and blah, 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 and everything. So I don't know. So I'm just going to throw scale in the pile and light it on fire.
Well, no, that's a fair point, because that's always the thing that that's always the spanner that gets thrown at some of these kind of challenges. But I don't think it's enough to dismiss the idea. Scale is a challenge, but it shouldn't be used as a rebuff to say that we should just keep doing things the way that we've always done.
Yeah,
things.
agreed.
It's definitely it's there's like time, there's like space, and then there's kind of like scale, and scale's just like another vector that we need to kind of like factor into it. But it doesn't mean to say that we go, oh no, we're not going to do anything different because that doesn't, this has proven that, we can do things at scale, but that doesn't necessarily make it right.
Right.
Ever.
Yeah, pulling it back, in terms of the language part, that I was just writing this down. It made me think about this. We use the word systems thinking. We don't say systems theory. I mean, if I think about like a theory, like a sociological theory, a theory is there to explain the existence of, a set of interrelated propositions, right? So like how things work together. It helps you explain why society works the way it is. I wouldn't, from what I've read around complex systems or systems thinking, it's not doing that. Rather, it's giving a approach to trying to understand right how we should approach a thing. And so one of the things about systems thinking or complex systems is this element of you can't derive the solution from one academic perspective.
No.
You have to come at it from across different areas. And so going back to the hospital example, and this was an actual real case that I was working on with a client. They wanted to work with healthcare providers around identifying sex trafficking. Okay. And especially among children. And so they were talking to the nurses, they were talking to the social workers, they were talking to the doctors, giving them training on what to do and what to ask. When I was doing an observation of an emergency room, I said, well, who are those people over there? Well, those are the security guards. What do? Well, they sit there and they make sure that people don't do anything in the waiting room. Like they're not acting weird or funny. I'm like, well, what does weird or funny mean? Well, I don't know, just if they're being disruptive. So you're telling me you have people whose job it is to observe for suspicious behavior while people are waiting, which is probably the bulk of the time they're at the hospital, and they're not part of this conversation. Well, yeah, why would we include them? And you just kind of go, maybe because they're doing the thing that you're trying to get these other people to do who are way more busy than the security people are. And so it goes to this, like a systems approach would be to, okay, who are all the operators in the space? Who are all the people engaged? They all have knowledge, they all have expertise. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we should all bring them together and see what we can learn from them.
So what do you think actually stops people kind of joining those dots?
Yeah, I my honest opinion is I think a lot of it has to do with professional bias. I think it has to do with an idea of knowledge work and manual labor. I think it has to do with not being myopic, not being able to see the field. So I'm thinking about patients. If I think about patients, I'm thinking about doctors and nurses. If I think about the healthcare journey, like a journey map, I'm then thinking about all the touch points along the way or all the spaces along the way where this person's coming into contact with somebody or something that creates an opportunity for exploration. So that's a quick explanation. I'm curious what you all think, but that's two of the things I think blind people to seeing those individuals or those jobs as being essential to delivering answers.
What do you think,
by the
Adam?
way, some of it, by the way, might be race as well, because if you have certain racial categories who are working in certain kinds of jobs, they might not even know it's race. Are they less likely to see them as having knowledge related to whatever it is we're considering? So I don't want to avoid that part of it too, as well as gender.
Yeah, no, I think that's important, and I would echo the idea. It's interesting. I'm trying to think about this now outside of the of Gary's case study, because that very much actually is framing how I'm thinking about this. Just to because it's like if we're thinking about security guards in a hospital as it's funny because we say, okay, what does a security guard do? And it's like they're both making sure that law and order, quote unquote, are in place, and that things are happening as they should be, and that no one is under duress or threat. But then it's like when you say that extrapolated, when we're saying we're trying to understand and make sure that we can cut down on sex trafficking, then it's like, why would you not talk? Like if you're thinking about any Law and Order TV show or CSI, you're going to jump immediately to the investigative folks, right? Which are those which are would translate to security guards in this case. And so it is curious too that I think when context shifts, we're not really great at then recognizing the same kind of work. In case like, we might think Law and Order, we would immediately go to our police and maybe our attorneys, right, to have them help us solve the case. But then when we change that context to a hospital, we immediately think hospital, oh, doctors and nurses, like who are the quote, I guess essential staff is an interesting way to phrase that. And it's like, that's getting mixed up now in COVID thinking too of who's an essential worker. But But when we say who's the essential staff of any kind of institution, right? In a context, we then think of that. So it's like, if I want to go into an organization and understand like, why are things not working? Who am I going to talk to? You know, if I'm a McKinsey consultant, I'm going to say leadership, right? I'm going to say who's like guiding the boat. But then if I ask an anthropologist that, they're going to say we need to talk to the actual the employees and leadership too, right?
Sure.
And so I think I think too, I guess we just have trouble shifting our context, and maybe that is just a lack of systems perspective on one level of just realizing if we're able to create a value neutral like stakeholder map every time we would go into a situation to try to see what the problem is, and then B, how we might solve it, then that might help us overcome that bias. But I think too, like that's why I would just add context shifting is really tricky for us to do.
I mean, I think Gary's point about professional bias and worth and value and stuff and respect is definitely, particularly if you, and I guess it comes from what you store up in kind of like what you've accrued in your career and your position and stuff. And all that, I go back to that kind of belief structure is like, and then how you think about other people in other kind of like roles, or what would they know about that sort of thing? Because they haven't done 7 years worth of this and that and blah, blah, blah. Oh, they're only a security guard.
Right.
You're like going, yeah, but they're a security guard when somebody busts in and creates havoc and then they kind of like, and they subdue them, then they're like a hero, which is sort of relative, actually quite reflective of where we're currently at. In the situation where everybody's like going, yay for kind of frontline workers, right? Because we're in a crisis. But how much is going to change kind of when the effects of the crisis kind of recede? And I think that for me, I think that's fundamentally it's a very flawed value proposition of kind of where where we're at. You end up with this. Sometimes the most important people in an organization, either the ones that have the most contact with either a patient or a citizen or a customer or kind of whoever it might be, can often be some of the most badly paid and worst treated kind of members of staff in your organization. And I struggle with that.
Yeah.
No, I think that's spot on too. So often those roles are designed, these frontline workers and or call center employees or folks working at the front desk, right? Of who are greeting, customers when they come in. The roles are designed also to not be really good for them, and like they often have some of the highest turnover in churn, right? And they were also, the organization tends to see them as requiring the least skill or training too, which is quite interesting. To back to our MBA point, right? Of what is not taught for what is most valuable for business. And because I recently did a project with a client around that. We're interviewing CEOs of organizations about how they look at workplace relationships, and that was one of the pieces that stuck with me too. Is that they recognize that like they have the highest churn in essentially these customer facing roles, but don't have any set ideas of what it would mean to make those better, beside the fact that we should. And they would say in the same sentence that without having customers, there's no business. But then it's like, well, without having employees that work with customers,
right?
Yeah.
Map it out for them. It's like, so you do know that without employees, you couldn't do this. And even if, going back to, there's been an argument around the $15 minimum wage, right? Mm-hmm. So that if McDonald's is forced to pay people, I'm just saying McDonald's just as an example, if they're forced to pay $15 for minimum wage, it's going to replace the people with these touch screens. Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the same time, as Adrian, your book was laying out, and as others have showed, most people want to have, that personal touch point experience, especially for repeat customers. Mm-hmm. It's hard to be, one of the things I ask my students is what's the difference between a customer and a regular? It's hard to become a regular with a machine.
Yeah.
And it's that feeling of like, I belong, that I'm recognized, that, that I matter here. That sure, you can service, if all you want to do is have transactional moments where you try to get customers in and customers out, you can absolutely go with a machine if that's what you want to do. If you want to create a customer experience built on relationships and authenticity, You're going to
But it's
need
also
people.
it's also one of the fascinating things about it, and it relates to social and anthropological sort of perspective. We are social kind of beings, right? And yet the advent of technology is supposed to make things kind of faster, quicker, easier, all that sort of stuff. But actually, you take away that kind of social, kind of human kind of element. And to your point, kind of Gary, you take away the potential to belong. And it just reminds me of the theme tune to Cheers,
Right.
which I'm not going to kind of like break into kind of like a rendition of. But for anybody listening, then do look it up. But that's the real kind of value, right? Why would you want to expend your time and effort always chasing kind of new if you can't build some loyalty or retention, some belonging, as it were? And because that's what people want. But if you're not working hard to kind of give them that, then it's like you're on a fast track to commoditizing your own business.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think this is where, like with your book, and this is like the question, that needs to be asked is, how can we help you, CEO? This is we know this stuff, right? But yet the paradigm, the culture of the organization, the imagined role of the place in the org chart is that, I'm not going to listen. And that's where, the disruption is, rather than just incrementally saying, well, maybe we can do this, maybe we can do that. Maybe it's like, no, you need to really accept that if you want to be different, you have to be deviant in some way. You have to change. You have to go against that which you were taught in your program, you thought was, the rule, and think differently. And when companies we have examples, and in your book at the end, you have like, the list of companies that you talk about,
Yeah.
like Patagonia, right? Or I forgot the name of the company where that gentleman was paying his workers $70,000 while reducing his pay.
Dan Price at Gravity Payments.
There you go.
Who kind of Josh Limbaugh kind of like called him a communist because he was going to break all the rules. You're like, how dare you pay kind of like people a minimum salary of $70,000? It's like going, it'll be the destruction of the United States of America.
Well, keeping with the punk theme here, I'm just going to write this down because I think it's pretty good. It is the deviant that makes the difference, right? I mean, whether it is Yvon Chouinard, let my people go surfing,
Yeah.
or the example you just mentioned. These are the people who were, are seen as deviant, but yet they're making the difference in terms of showing how to live the rhetoric that is so easily espoused, but so hard to live up to.
Mm-hmm. And I think the interesting kind of thing about all of this is, so I kind of like the idea of deviant in a positive way, because it just, it implies you're just taking a very different direction. You're deviating from the path, as it were. And in the words of kind of the was it the Robert Frost poem, kind of the road less traveled.
Right.
But that requires you to, I guess, be brave and take a degree of personal kind of risk. But it also, I think, it requires the idea that if you're not willing to do that, then get out of the way and fire yourself, or step down, or step aside, or whatever. Because if you can be honest with yourself, honest enough with yourself, you say, I'm just not going to be able to do that, then go find a place that is a bit safer for you and get out of the way of somewhere that's a bit more ambitious. Because I think there's so much potential, but it's just being held back by many people that are not willing to take a risk or give up some stuff, or to look foolish, or to be wrong, or whatever. Yes, I know sort of psychologically we fear being wrong because it strikes at the very heart of our survival kind of nature. So we see being wrong as being a threat, and it's a real sort of fight or flight sort of thing. But I think the idea of, like anything, like if you're an athlete, when you're training, you get used to pain when you train, right?
Right.
And so maybe the thing to do is to try and pick one thing which might feel like a huge thing that you're going to do differently. And then just try that. And then see what happens. Don't tell anybody, just do it yourself. You know, the world is not watching, and not waiting for you to do, you know, things. But it's almost a bit like build up your, like, what's the word? Like condition yourself to do that sort of stuff. And I think that's where you probably get ready. But that requires, again, the space and the time and the inclination to do it, I think.
I like the idea too of sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Adam.
I like actually what I hear you describing too is both like as if positive deviance was a coin, right? And one side of it is those that are willing to then, you know, pay themselves $70,000 or pay everyone $70,000 minimum. And then the flip side is like, if you won't do that, then get out of the way. And so it's interesting too, because I, you know, to your point too about conditioning oneself to do good or to do these kinds of things, I think there is definitely something that resonates here with me. And I mean, thinking about mindfulness practice too, in terms of like, you have to take the small steps to make a change, right? You can't just say, I'm now going to, you know, flip the entire company. But if you do certain small things at you know, at moments, if that makes it easier, then like it makes us more willing to be wrong because it lowers the stakes of being wrong, right? It's not my company will crater and everyone ever will never invest in me or whatever it is, you know, but by making these changes, then also the other side of it too, I think is just, you know, like the idea of being wrong, of course, the hidden word in there is that we don't want to be socially wrong. Right? We don't want our peers to be like, you're out, get out, exile.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but the good thing is like, also like with Punk CX too, is that part of it is, I think, about making people aware of the bigger community of those that are willing to be positive deviants. Right. And that, that's one of the key things. Cause then it's like the social cost of it goes down. It's like, I actually don't remember, maybe you remember this, Gary. I don't remember the name of the phenomenon, but it's like the bravest person is actually the second one to do something.
Mm-hmm.
The first one's just crazy. The second one that follows them is the one that then, okay, now it begins to make a movement, right? And there's something about that, I think, too, of making that visible.
Yeah. I like it. I mean, I think there's when you were talking there, it reminds me of the idea that, yeah, you can build up to this. It's a bit like what Philip Seligman was talking about when in his book Positive Psychology. This is not about kind of like, you know, it's not happy clappy kind of like you're great kind of in the mirror sort of like stuff. And if, you know, it's not that indoctrination. It's about how you frame things, how you kind of like teach yourself to see the world and to do certain things. And I think that I find fascinating. And I just encourage, you know, not just leaders, because it's not just the premise of leaders. It's just the premise of it's almost like I would say it's a responsibility and the obligation of pretty much everybody is to try and just do more and be more. You know, I'd like to see people, I don't know, more people walk down the street and make eye contact with each other and then nod, smile, crumbs.
Yeah.
You know, I've got a rather tongue-in-cheek passage at the end of not Punk CX, but the last book I wrote before that, it's called How to Wow. And in the last passage, it was like, it's almost a bit like, I have a dream, ... completely tongue in cheek. And it was like the idea, if we could just make service a little bit better for everybody, kind of everywhere and every day, then people would have better days. We'd get into less arguments. There'd be less fights, less war, kind of like conflict, world peace, hallelujah. Thanks very much.
Right.
You know, because it's that sort of ripple effect type of sort of thing. Because it all starts with like small sort of like steps. And so, yeah, I'm insanely optimistic about that sort of stuff and probably completely idealistic. But if I keep banging the drum, then maybe somebody's going to hear, you know. But I want to stop kind of rattling on. I want to ask you, because this is one thing I'm like I told earlier about. It was the idea. I love learning new things from adjacent spaces, and I know you guys are deep in, the interface between sociology and anthropology and business and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, what are you guys looking at, researching, thinking about right now that's kind of like emerging that go, ooh, that's interesting. There could be something in that. What's your veins of research or something that you're, or big research questions that you're pondering kind of right now? Because I always think kind of like some of the stuff that comes out of academia is fascinating, incredibly useful, and there's not enough of an interface between the business and practical kind of like worlds and a lot of the research that goes on in academia.
You want to go first, Ed?
You're more in the academic space than I am, so you can go first.
I am. Well, there's two things that come to mind for me, like right now. One would be what I call diversity and data. And by that, I mean, there's a lot of work being done. And I'm lucky enough to be working with a PhD student this semester on the sociology of finance, because of the work that's happening around how algorithms, how machine learning can perpetuate and generate an inequality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in many ways it dispels the notion that these, it's just the data, right? The data is neutral, the data is objective. Well, it's absolutely not. There's a really wonderful book called Data Feminism I used last semester. There's a really great book called Invisible Women about how women aren't even present in data. They're not even counted. So then when the algorithms are built off of that data, they're not present in those algorithms and those analyses that happen. So whether it's an activist or a feminist orientation to even the spaces of data and the need, that really does underline the need for diversity, because the data, if the data isn't diverse and doesn't capture the multiple voices that exist, then the analysis is going to perpetuate that inequality and that power differential that it captured originally, right? So I think I think there's a lot of really strong stuff that I'm hoping to do more of. And GameStop, by the way, kind of underlines the sociology of the markets, right? I mean, it's people are like, oh, you mean what people think and do matters? Like, I don't know, maybe we might want to take a look at that. People often would ask me, Adam probably gets the same thing. Well, what can you do with a sociology degree? I'm like, well, I sure as hell can analyze GameStop and tell you why that happened.
Yep.
Right. So that's the first thing. The second thing related to that is around complex systems. And I think that, getting into those areas of dancing landscapes, of emergence, of integration, right, of even simulation, combining those elements from computer science, from biology, from chemistry, from physics, from ecology, with economics and sociology and psychology. And that element
and scenario planning in there
and
as well.
Exactly right. Going in there, working in those hybrid teams creates real opportunity to share, learn, and try to understand. So, whether it's like stuff from the Santa Fe Institute or other areas where people are actively engaged in this, and it's also that translation, right? Because it's not just furthering our academic understanding, it's towards some kind of end, and also understanding the limits of our understanding, that we are not masters over our analytic domain, that some things are impossible to predict, like black swan events, and we just have to be okay with that. Even though doesn't mean we shouldn't try to understand. It doesn't mean we can't control everything through our wit, guile, and technology.
Yeah.
Wit, guile, and technology. I like it.
I just made that up. I'm typing it down. I'm typing it.
It's
a keeper. Write it down.
I would say, just to add a bit on that, but also just some things that I'm seeing. I think something that's really struck me that's been on my radar also, because it's where I'm doing more work now, is around what does it look like to empower social scientists to be data analysts. And so, because agreed to the point that data isn't neutral itself. But and we need a social science lens in order to, take a more systems perspective, I think, a more human systems perspective. But then at the other side too, it's what does it look like when social scientists are the data analysts? And we don't see that super often time. And this is just an example in terms of a company I work with now called Motive Base, that we do technology enabled research, for consumer packaged goods, for restaurant companies, for all sorts of things. But the work, our work is to interpret the data that we get, like, for clients. And there's something really interesting about that idea. I mean, any analyst is interpreting data, but like, there's something that when anthropologists and political scientists and sociologists are the ones intentionally doing that, and that's called out as who is the data analyst for this kind of work. It changes the question. It changes the equation. It changes what the clients think they're getting. And that's been really interesting to see so far. And so I'm excited to see kind of how this develops further too. And as we put social scientists in these positions of being analysts themselves for businesses.
Yeah. Ooh, that's interesting. No, fascinating.
Indeed.
Indeed.
That's what we do here. We go,
We go,
And then we stroke our chins.
We look gaze off into the distance.
We put our feet up on the desk and we say, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm working. I'm working. This is what work looks like."
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Gary.
I'll say, I thought, wrapped up in all of this is really this need for public scholarship, right? I mean, it's this integration of perspectives that can only be accomplished when people get out from behind the walls of the academy and into the world to not just study, but to engage and to collaborate. And that's where, whether it's the podcast or whether it's live streaming or whether it's, social media, there's so much anti-information out there, not fake news, because that would mean it's news. It's anti, right? It's anti-material, it's anti-matter, right? There's so much of that out there that there needs to be an increasing earnestness around engaging more broadly with people in terms that they can understand, appreciate, and act upon. And whether it's, that's what I liked about your book too, is like it translates.
Well, thank you.
You could have wrote that same book with a lot fewer pictures and a lot more words and a lot of references. It would have not necessarily been better.
Oh no, I mean, that book could have been could have been 3-4 times longer, with lots of black ink on white paper and lots of kind of like detailed kind of case studies and 2x2 matrices and all that sort of stuff. And it would have been it may have been quite useful, but it would have been dull. And I think that I was lucky enough to come up with an idea born out of frustration that I was able to carve into a piece of art, my own art, as it were, that basically says, you know what? If you don't like it, then fuck you. In true punk fashion. Yeah, he's drop the mic and then just leave. It's like going, but if you want to sit and you want to have a conversation and you want to chew around and you have, and have a rummage around some of these ideas, then let's have at it. Because what's going on right now, I don't think is good enough, particularly in that whole service and experience sphere. And I think we can do better. And it was just an incitement to do better work. That's it. And yeah, so I call it my own personal kind of like art project, because I did it because I had no expectations out of it. I thought, I'll do it and see what happens. And wonderfully, it's landed with a whole bunch of people. Somebody even called it a cult classic the other day. I'm like, how the hell did that happen? I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
That's a cult I wouldn't mind joining.
Well, you can.
As opposed to the ones running around right now, which seem a little bit
oh dear,
a little bit suspect.
Yeah.
That's the other CX cult experience.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think there's and it was just a call against reductivism. you know, God, like open your eyes, look around. Um, and that that was it. And so, and I wrestled with the idea of like, can I put more into it? Should I do volume 2? Am I going to fall into kind of second album sort of like kind of folly, blah 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 blah, and then I go, oh no, I've got a rod for my own back. What am I going to do to beat this? Should I just write something boring next? Like, who knows?
A pop-up book.
Oh,
There you go.
yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about a graphic novel, but then I have to find somebody to do that with.
There you go.
That's a
Or
cool
just
idea.
like I don't know, a novel. I tell you, one of the best business novels I ever read was The Goal by Eli Goldratt.
Don't know it.
And if you've never heard of that, you should check it out, because I think you'll love it, because it's about it takes very much a systems approach to things, but it's also about this idea about the theory of constraints.
Mm.
I think you guys will like it, because like it's like somebody's personal kind of journey, and then he's being mentored by somebody in this kind of like he's taking on this kind of manufacturing kind of plan, and it's like it's sometimes you have to read it and you're like going, what? Go back and then read it again, because it's like it's a really engaging, very well written, really engaging piece, but sometimes it gets quite complex, and some of it is a really kind of counterintuitive, but it's brilliant, really really good.
Well, I was just thinking about as you were describing that, I was also thinking about what a pop-up book would look like if the owner of the company was screwing over his workers, how that might manifest itself as a pop-up book.
I don't know.
I'm not sure that I would like that image.
Yeah, I think that the thing that springs to my mind is Chevy Chase kind of trying to whack the kind of the gopher on the golf course.
Right.
I think it makes sense.
Yeah, no, gentlemen, you know what? I want to say thank you for making me think about some of this sort of stuff. And I know from my own podcast, kind of like sake, that just the very fact that I'm speaking to fine gentlemen that are majorly in the sort of sociological and anthropological kind of fields, that'll just add a piquant of interest, if you like, and diversity into some of the the channel that we've got. I like to put that sort of stuff in, because I benefit. Hopefully, people that we that listen in kind of benefit, and I'm trying to mix things up and play around with the formula a little bit. Do multiple kind of like different sort of people, kind of random kind of chats, a rummage arounds. I might call them a series of rummages. But it's helpful to me, because I think, Gary, like you said, rightly so, is that actually having a conversation about stuff that's in the public domain that has no real purpose, rather than just to explore and to understand, I think that's useful, because I think it furthers understanding. I think a lot of the time, a bit back to that idea around Einstein's quote about how do you spend your time, how do you spend an hour when confronted with a problem. I think the more time we spend trying to understand a problem, the better equipped we are going to be able to think about solving it.
Amen.
Well, thanks, Adrian. This has been awesome.
Thanks. It's been a lot of fun. And we always appreciate the rummage too. It's a
Yeah, we're nothing but
exercise.
A bunch of trash anyway, right?
Yeah, we're rummaging in the rubbish, right? Is that?
Well, I think so. I mean, no one ever said, like I was talking today when I was live streaming, you can't open up the want ads and find people looking for a sociologist. It doesn't it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny because at the same time there's a lot to offer, but it's like, oh no.
I think the thing that what struck me, I was going to ask actually as well, is that it'd be interesting to get your take around this massive move to remote working, and
Right.
how that impacts kind of the group dynamics and kind of the sociology of organizations when you've got this massive move and then people come back to some sort of hybrid structure or not, or like a balance. People kind of strike a different kind of balance, how that's going to impact some of the social bonds that those groups will have.
Yeah, I would say that a big part of this, I mean, here in the United States, we're seeing it. You know, we talk about COVID as a thing, which you really can't, because in some parts of the country, you might not be able to tell there's a pandemic, right? People are just kind of going to bars, they're going to restaurants, they're out in the open. And then in other places, like here in Massachusetts, where Adam and I both are located, it's not locked down, but there are significant restrictions put on how people are engaging with each other in space. So, you know, I think people say like no one's ever going to want to go back to work again. Companies should sell their offices. I'm not buying that. I'm just not buying it. I think that while we might not miss being in traffic, we miss the transition time of going from work to home. We miss the time of let's listen to the radio by ourselves. I mean, there's a lot of loss of alone time for many people. I mean, some are having too much of it and they're going to want to get out. But for those of us who have like families, I have like 3 kids and a wife and 2 dogs and 5 chickens, 2 guinea pigs and 2 birds. It's a mess. I'm more than happy to leave.
Yeah, fair enough.
What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, no, I think that is right. You know, and the other thing too is like it is true that there, you know, we hear things like Zoom fatigue and like there are truths about this idea too that like it is hard for us to. It takes more mental and physical energy to communicate online all day than it does to just pop down and talk to somebody in their office for 2 minutes to get something cleared up. You have to like literally say, "Hey, can I schedule a time to talk with you?" and then do a video chat, and
Right.
you're missing all sorts of like nonverbal cues sometimes. And, you know, and as we all know too, just if there's a slightest lag in a conversation, it makes it so frustrating because you keep talking over each other. But no, you go ahead. No, you go ahead. You know, there's just things like this too that, you know, that could theoretically be solved if internet bandwidth and software gets better. Sure. But at the same time, you know, I'd be surprised if the world as a whole said, we don't want everyone to quote, go to work anymore. Because that also then implies that work is someplace that we don't want to be. Right. And like, I don't think we all go just because we have to, right. They're like, we tend to find things that we like about, you know, and not every job is great, obviously, but like, and that's like part of why we both have podcasts and write books about this, because it's like, there's work to be done. But I don't know. I think about this too, where it's like people both will make the best of what they can in any situation. But at the same time, you know, I also don't think that we all treat work as a slave enterprise. Right. And I think that's important to recognize too. Like, how do we find the good in each situation? But then also, I mean, to our other point about, you know, even in your book too, it's not just about transformation, but evolution. It's like, how do we then take what we learn from having to have different situations happen and then evolve them? Right. So I think we have an incredible opportunity to learn from what remote work has taught us. You know, and like to confront our demons of saying that certain people are not quote unquote essential workers and that other ones are. And then that we all should just be able to have meetings back to back to back because we don't have to commute. Like we need to like also wrestle with those demons, right? But then take some of the good aspects too of that. We actually don't have to go to the office all the time, right? So I know we're in a space of incredible opportunity, I think, but it does require us to like seriously rummage on both the good and the bad side of it, right? And instead of just saying, well, we'll see you back in the office when this is over, right? The new normal, I think, is we have to lose that phrase, right? It's like there is no normal in this case. We have to then choose and evolve.
You know, there's a British comedian that's called Richard Ayoade, and he has been on a bank advert, excuse me, for HSBC lately, and he eschewed the idea of a new normal. He's like, forget the new normal. This is the new different.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was just like going, oh, that's brilliant. You know, some people go like new never normal. And he's like going, let's get rid of that because normal sort of harkens back to kind of like a standard.
Yeah.
Right. And it's almost like, in many ways, it's regressive or not regressive, retrospective in many ways, because you're almost the reference is the new thing that was based on what was here, right?
Right.
Mhm.
And actually, it's a very simple phrase, but it's like the new different. And I just really like it. I just kind of like going, yeah, no, that says what it needs to say.
Yeah, I like that. I like that too. I'm gonna start using that now.
The new different.
It's a great podcast name. The New Different.
Yeah, no, but I think you're absolutely right, Adam. I think the thing that around to kind of just like that seeing things for what they are, seeing what's good, what do we gain, what do we lose, what do we want, what do we need, all of those different things, and different, and I guess it will require us to be more flexible in terms of we need to be more flexible in terms of like what work means, and work's not just about, for many people, it's not going to be about punching in and punching out, and we have to reappraise kind of like that. It has to be outcomes based. Some will be very much time based because it's located to a spatial, a particular location and doing a particular sort of thing. But other people might be able to get to a point where actually it's more based on outcomes rather than time sort of worked.
Mm-hmm.
And that'd be interesting. But again, that requires people to unlearn kind of like systems of control and all of that sort of stuff. So we'll see where we get to.
Why the word manager is the wrong and management is the wrong word.
Yeah.
I think we have a new book to write, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the thing is, that because Gary, you kind of said about language and how language is really important. Because if you think about managing, so when somebody if you ask somebody how they are and they're like, oh, we're managing.
Right.
I mean, what does it imply?
Right.
It almost implies that they're clinging on.
Right.
Particularly if they're talking about kind of like you're going through a difficult time. How are you doing? Oh, we're managing. It's like we're coping. It's like managing and coping is a synonym. So you're like, oh, hanging on, like, and it's like it doesn't necessarily imply a degree of confidence or control.
I brought a Lean Six Sigma expert into my home, and we got rid of 2 of my 3 kids because they were redundant.
Exactly.
We just decided that they were basically doing the same thing that one kid was doing, and the one kid actually had better prospects than the other 2. So we let the other 2 go, but we told them how valuable that we thought they were. And we wished them the best in their future in finding another family to join.
We give them a reference if they needed.
Right. They just weren't measuring up to standards. I mean, what are you going to do?
There's a you like this. There's a company that I know. It's run by a guy called Henry Stewart, and it's called Happy Limited. It was originally called Happy Computers Limited. It's like a training company based in London, and Henry runs his company. He was inspired by the work of Ricardo Semler, what he did at Semco in Brazil, and particularly the book that he wrote about all of that called Maverick, which if you've not read, you should read. It's from the 1980s, and it's blow your mind sort of stuff. And one of the things that Henry can put in place is like when they have to let somebody go, regardless of if it's for gross insubordination, they work hard to find that person another job, their next job. Because they believe that they're just there on the journey. Now, it doesn't matter kind of how the relationship has kind of like stopped or broken down sort of thing. They believe that actually it's up to them to try and support them on the next stage of their kind of journey, because actually they're just doing the right thing by that kind of person. And also they'll end up being this positive advocate for the business. And I just think that's it's hard work, but it's a wonderful thing to do.
Absolutely. It's like you said, I think Adam said humanity, we're experts at, being a humanity, hopefully, and just doing the right thing by people.
Yeah. We just need to be experts in ourselves.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, it's funny too, because that's actually one of the fundamental goals of customer service today, right? Is to get the evangelist, like you want to have such good service that people will just go out and tell everybody you've got to go with this company. But we don't do that for employees, right? We don't make sure they would say, yeah, I don't work there anymore for XYZ reasons, but they're still awesome. And you should definitely try to, whatever it is. They don't do it on that side either. And it's certainly a missed opportunity.
I completely. I mean, another thing, I think, you think about this whole sort of thing around scenarios and things. And you could, I actually think that some of the biggest opportunities that can present itself exist in the extremities of organizations and our interactions. Because actually those are the things that get put under the least amount of scrutiny.
Right.
And so I've come up with this idea where we're like, what would it take to design a complaints procedure that you celebrated?
Right.
That's a good
Right?
question.
Just think about it. He's like going, no, I'm not saying that that's a good strategy. Kind of like do enough crap shit like that you end up with this deluge of kind of complaints. I'm not saying that at all, but most complaints procedures are rubbish.
Right.
It's like sending somebody to the kind of like Dante's kind of like 7th level of hell, But what would it be like if you just gone, actually, if somebody's taking the time to complain, then we recognize that something's gone wrong. And we need to create that. We need to make that an experience that is worth celebrating. That they're going to come at the end and go like, they're rock stars. What would it take to do that?
Then
just as there you go. And I think that's the thing, is that we not to be scared to kind of shine a torch into some of the dark corners and ask ourselves, what if?
Yeah, being deviant.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.